Welcome to the most anticipated episode of the channel. This episode is about the strategy. Yes, after releasing the first video, many asked me, what is the strategy that I mentioned? How can there be a strategy that beat 90% of the professional? Well, in the last episode of the profit report, I mentioned that the strategy is just a very simple equation. It's just called 40% TQQ. Huh. So if I'm a beginner, when I hear that, like, oh, I don't know what that is. Must be very complex, right? Must be something that I have to keep managing, keep looking at my phone and all those stuff to actually outperform a professional. What if I tell you it's actually much easier than that? It's only take me one trade per year. Yes, one trade. So in order to do one trade, it's only take like 5 minutes. So one trade per year is very easy. Anybody can learn it. I have a quote, a note there. It's a it worked best for a retirement account because this strategy is revolved again around a trade. It means that every time you make a trade, if it's profitable, you have to pay tax at the end of the year. So this is why it's best for a retirement account where um, tax does not interfere with your gain. So that's the only drawback of this strategy. So it's designed for a retirement account. Okay, so that's the drawback. So, but what if I tell you there's many benefit on top of beating the market? So let me show you what's the next benefit. Okay, it's set a limit loss. What does that mean? So, for example, let's just say we have a war, something big or crazy happen. The whole stock market go down by 70%. Crazy, like the Great Depression, for example. So if the market is down 70%, most people lost 70% of their portfolio. But what if I tell you your loss is only 30 something percent? Because what you what's the strategy is that you put 40% of your portfolio in TQQQ. So whatever you put in is the amount that you would lose if it go away. If it just disappear, that's the maximum amount that you will lose. So since my maximum input is 40%, that's the maximum loss that I have for this strategy. So the max you can lose is actually 40%. But more likely, if the market were to crash, it's more likely to lose 30 something percent. So it allow you to prevent a crazy crash if it happened, which does not happen very often. Okay, so there actually more benefit to this strategy. So let me bring up the next one. The next benefit is that the 60% cash that you have on the side, it earn interest. So even when you beat the market using 40%, the 60% also give you an extra bonus every year. Isn't that cool? So the cash sitting on the side is actually very safe and it's actually gain interest. So it's more like additional gain that you can have with using this strategy. And I think there's another benefit that I have. The last one is called additional 60% plus buying power. Huh. So what's Uncle Ben said? With great power come great responsibility. So that additional 60% cash that we normally have on the side, you can use that as buying power. But with so much leverage that we have on the 40% TQQ, every time you use that 60% cash, it means that you signing up for more risk. So in a way, this could be a good thing where to me personally, it make me think harder when making a trade. Because every trade I make, I need to make sure it's 100% win or at least up there. If it's not worth the trade, like if just like 60%, 40% win rate, I wouldn't need to take it because if I just sit back and just wait for the end of the year, I'm beating the market just by default. So there's no need for me to make so many move. So only when there's really good opportunity will I take those trade. And if you follow my tracking, which is the two account that I create, right now I'm buying two opportunity that I think will go up in the short term. using that extra cash. Okay, next. So what is the formula behind 40%? So how did I come up with that 40% magic number, right? So 2 years ago, I was doing very well in the market. I was up like around 50, 60%, while the market's up like 20%. But if someone were to ask me like, can you beat the market every year since you beat the market by 30% in just that 1 year? I would struggle to say yes. Actually, it's not easy. Uh, so I decide, you know what? If I cannot beat the market, I need to join the market. But I don't want to just buy the market, right? Because I can just buy the market, the whole portfolio go into the market and just stuck. And then at the end of the year, I'm just equal to the market. So how can I beat the market? But at that time, I was exposed to leverage. I can say, you know what? I have leverage power. So with only 40%, 30 to 40% of the 3x leverage, I can mirror the performance of the market. So that's when I would decide to test out 40% TQ against the market. And then to my surprise, when I actually run the number, it's actually beat the market. So here's the actual algebra formula behind it. So the first information we have is that the average performance of the SPY between 2011 to 2025 is about 14%. Another information that you can collect is that the average performance for the Q is 19.5% the last 15 years. Okay, so next, and you know that the leverage for the Q is called a TQQQ, which is 3 times the leverage of the QQQ. So 3 times Q equals TQQQ, basically triple Q. Okay, so what can I do with that information? So what I did with that information is that I calculate the factor difference between the Q and SPY. So I get the gain difference divided by the SPY difference. So I get the Q divided by the SPY. I get a factor of 1.4. But maybe that's just the past, right? So I try to conservative lower that number to more closer to 1.25 instead of 1.4. Um, because I think that's more accurate in terms of representation of the difference between SPY and the Q. So I went with the 1.25. So the equation now is QQQ equal 125 times SPY. Okay. So now what can I do with that? So my strategy is 40% TQQ, right? So I just write 40% equal 0.4. Okay. And since the TQ is triple leverage, I multiply by 3, and then triple leverage of the Q, so I multiply the Q. So when you do the math, you're gonna end up with 0.4 times 3 times QQQ equal 1.2 QQQ. So 40% TQQ is the equivalent to 1.2 QQQ. Okay, good to know, right? Next, I do the same formula, but instead of the Q, I replace the Q with the SPY. So I replace QQQ with 1.25 times SPY. So I plug that in the equation, I get 1.2 times 1.25 times SPY equal 1.5 SPY. So 40% TQQQ is equivalent to 1.5 times SPY. So what does that mean? 1.5 times SPY. It means that whatever SPY is performing, I should be performing about 150%, 1.5 times factor. So if SPY go up 10%, the projected performance of the 40% TQ should be 15%. But that also true on the downside. So if SPY down 10%, the projected performance for the 40% is down 15%. So there's some risk based on this equation. But to my surprise, when I actually run the data, the risk was minimal. And also, the magic number I use here is 40%. Doesn't mean everybody should use 40%. If you feel like the number 40 is too high because it's end up to be 1.5 times the SPY, you can reduce this number to something like a 30, a 20, to make the factor much lower so that you don't have to worry about the last one, in case the market decide to dip. Okay, so next, let's look into the actual data of how this all work. Okay, let's take a look. It's take forever to load. Okay, okay. So here are the data. It's look overwhelming. So where do we begin, right? So just looking at this, you're probably overwhelmed by all the number. Okay, so let me control this. So here are the data behind uh, from 2015 to 2025. I use this instead of using 2011 to 2025, I use 2015 to 2025 to demonstrate to you that the number that I got, which is 292,000 that I show on the very first video. So so the column B here is the performance of the actual SPY in ETF between 2015 to 2025. So you can look in Google. All these numbers should be accurate, and I'm pretty sure they are accurate. And then the Q, you can collect them in Google as well. Just look up this ticker and then look up all those year. You should have those. And for the TQ, you can also look all those year like that. What are the performance of the TQ? And DK is something that we will discuss on a later video where it's when you deal with a leveraged ETF such as TQ, there's some element that affect our performance. It's called DK. But in this case, I will go over that on a later video. So using the formula that I showed you earlier, I was able to calculate the performance each year of the base strategy, which is 40%, right? Okay, so how do I use this spreadsheet? Okay, so all this yellow is the input. So I put 10,000 in initial investment. Oh, one mistake that I made on the very first video is that I stated that I put 55,000 investment to gain 292, but in fact it was 60,000 because the initial investment I put 10,000 instead of 5, which is true normally because the first year you contribute to Roth, you can contribute to the year before that if you contribute before April 15, assuming you work the year before that. Okay, so if you actually put 5,000, the number will be more accurate, which is 246, which is still very good. Since your only contribution is only 55. So let's go back to that 10,000. Okay, so that would be your initial investment. And then if you do, let's just say you don't want to put any investment after that initial, you just put 0 and that will calculate your return. So let's just say you have no recurrent investment. All you did is you put 10,000 in 2015 and you just set it and use the strategy. And at the end of 2025, that 10,000 is 90,000. If you look at the Q, it's only 65 and the SPY is only 40. And the cash interest, what is that? In the slide earlier, I did mention that one of the benefit of this strategy is that there is a cash interest where cash sitting doing nothing will gain an interest of 3%. I put 3% because that's the average across 100 years of data that I found. So 3% is a very reasonable number. And the risk percentage is 40 because the strategy is revolved around 40% TQ, so I put 40. So let's just say you can change this number to change your strategy. So how do I determine that 40%? So I create a risk level chart where 40% would consider extra risk, where someone young like me, below 30, I'm okay with doing some extra risk. I do not recommend above that actually. Like the 50, actually, if you change this to 50, actually gain more. But there's a risk on doing that because look at all this year. We only have one red year. If we have more red year, 50 is very dangerous. So that's why I normally go with 40 max, unless depend on the condition. But 40 is my nominal number. But let's just say if someone wants less risk, let's just say if I don't feel good about the market this year, I can go with 30%. So if we look at the performance at 30% compared to the market, 30% from 2015 to 2025, you put in SPY is 40,000, while in the Q is 65, and while using 30% of the strategy is 62, which is about the same as the Q. But yeah, so 30% is about the Q, which is not beating the Q. That's why I'm not using 30%. So that's why I use the 40% as the nominal. Okay, so let's change this back to the original number, which is 10,000 investment and 5,000 recurring. That's how we get the 292,000. Okay, so I explained all this level. Let's see. Here's the formula to this strategy. So you can solve this, basically the formula I showed you earlier. You can read that and compare the actual performance in here. Okay. Okay, so one thing I need to mention is that I create a performance chart for the TPR goal. That is the account that I'm actively managing right now, where whatever I perform in the base strategy, I will beat that base strategy by 5%. That's the goal that I'm setting for this TPR account. So let's just say the example that I use where I put 10,000 in 2015 and 5,000 recurring each year after 2015, and after 11 year that account became 292. What if that example was using a TPR strategy where it used the 40% base strategy by default and also gained an extra 5% each year by take advantage of the trading of using the 60% extra cash that's sitting waiting to collect interest, right? So when there's a good opportunity, you get those cash, you put in, you make profit, you get out. So let's just say I do that very consistently and was able to get 5% each year, just 5%. So here's the formula. As you can see, just add an extra 5% on whatever the base strategy is. So if I were to make that happen and achieve that 5%, my performance no longer 292. It's actually become 415. When all my total contribution is only 60, I went from 60 to 400K. That's about 7x. That's a very impressive performance. Yeah, that is the goal of this channel. The goal of this channel is not the base strategy. That's something I'm giving to you for free. But the TPR goal is the goal of this channel. I'm always trying to find a way to beat the old strategy. And then I'm also experimenting option to outperform the TPR goal. So constantly trying to improve and develop the best strategy out there. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to our formula to see if it actually worked. Okay, so let's review our formula again. So our formula is that 40% TQQQ is equivalent to 1.2 QQQ. Okay, so you can say right here. So QQQ is 222, right? So I got that number from the final result here, which is 222. And then our 40% should be whatever 222 multiply 1.2. So the final number should be 266. But what do we have? We have 292. Okay, so what we have was 292. Okay, so and the SPY is 160 over here. Multiply 1.5, which is 240, which is less than 292. Both of them end up less than 292. So why is that? Well, in our formula, we did not account for the cash interest. So let's just say if I were to reduce this cash interest to 0, which is what our formula is. So when I change this to 0, our performance is 257. So this is no longer there. It's 2 257 with length middle of this two. So it's close enough where our formula is replicated using real data. So the real data is 257. Our projected formula is between 240 and 266, which the average of those two is 253. Very close. So the formula actually worked out. And the surprising thing is that the cash interest, just 3%, consistently gain that 3% from the cash, help us gain an extra like 40,000. That is very impressive. That is it. That's the introduction to my strategy. I will develop more video to go more in depth or more improvement on my strategy at a much later time. But this is the introduction to my strategy. I hope this is helpful to you, and I'll see you again on the next episode of the Profit Rookie.